Everyone, I'm here today to give a presentation that thankfully is not about anything political, because I think that after this week, we're all very, very fatigued in that regard. So this is a more light paper. It's very, very theoretical. It's called College Admissions and the Stability of Marriage. It is my favorite academic paper, and of course, this academic paper would be the favorite of somebody that has a favorite academic paper. So this is about systems of market design that we'll get into. So I want to start with a critical question. So let's say I have a wonderful first date. At the end of it, I slide a crisp $20 bill from across the table to pay them for their time. Determine the probability P that we have a second date. So you do not have to find probability P, but the point of this question is that there are some market environments where money should not be used. This is due to any concoction of different limitations, whether they be moral, contextual, or practical. And so in these places, we need to worry about market design. So the way that we can take money out of the equation, but still do good allocations of resources. So some of these are things like school admissions, organ donations, like I should not be able to say sell my kidney for $800 because there are some implications to that sort of system. Political influence, which is why in this class we've talked a lot about voting systems, and of course, marriage. And so all of these, the algorithm that we're going to be talking today is one form of market design in order to create smart markets in these cases. So the stable marriage problem exists in any market where there are two sets of players where there's no overlap between the sets, and everyone has a preference list of players in the other set. And ultimately, the goal is to pair them off such that no two players will prefer each other over their assigned partners. And that is what makes a configuration stable. So there's no case where once the pairing is done, you could go to someone else and they're like, hey, I hate my partner. Do you want to be partners with me instead? So there's no shifting around like that. And so back in 1962, David Gale and Lloyd Shapley formalized this problem, and they came up with an algorithm, the Gale-Shapley stable matching algorithm, to find a stable match for any stable marriage problem. And so this is used in a lot of market design where you need to allocate discrete resources like this. So originally in the paper, it's called the stable marriage paper. So like obviously you know what the two groups were, but I wanted to make it, it's the year of our Lord 2020, and I wanted to make it a little bit less rigid in the definition of marriage. So instead of men, women, which is what it originally was, we're going to go with the Greeks and the Americans. And so let's say that you need to pair them off in exchange student pairs so that there's a Greek mentor and an American student. So in this case, because it's a stable marriage problem, every single person here has a preference for all of the people in the other set. So all of the Greeks have a preference list for Americans, and all the Americans have a preference list for the Greeks in mind. And we can take that from their preference list and we can put it in what looks like a game grid, but is not. It is a list of all the preferences compacted into a 4x4 list. And so what we want to do is we want to pair them off in such a way that none of them will leave their partner for anyone else. And so the Gale-Shapley algorithm works in stages. So the first stage, every single Greek is going to propose to their favorite American. And so in this case, you just go down the list. It doesn't matter what order you do the Greeks in because the ultimate result of each stage is agnostic to that. And then when you go through, each Greek proposes, and every American will accept the proposal from only their favorite Greek that they received a proposal from, but they will remain willing to renege on that proposal if a preferred one comes along. So I know that a few of you in this class actually are engaged, and I wish you the best of luck in this process. So in this case, the preferences that we have, we go through the list, and alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, the four Greeks, will propose to their favorite American first. So alpha proposes to A, and A doesn't have anyone right now, so they accept. Beta proposes to A, but A prefers alpha to beta, and so they decline the proposal. Another one came along, but they didn't prefer it to their current one. And then gamma proposes to B, delta proposes to D, and ultimately everyone has a proposal at the end of this stage except for beta, who is lonely. And so then the second stage of this, stage 2 to N, whenever this is complete, while there are still lonely Greeks in the system, the lonely Greeks will propose to their most preferred American next that they have not yet proposed to. And if an American receives a proposal from a Greek they prefer over their current proposal, they renege. And so in this case, B proposes to D, who accepts the proposal because D is currently engaged to delta. but prefers beta over delta in this list. So once the list of lonely Greeks is exhausted, everyone locks in their proposals. But at the end of this, because Delta was ejected, they go into the lonely Greek pool, and the next stage, Delta goes through their engagement process. So if you go through the entire process, this is what it looks like for this 4x4 grid. So what happens next is Delta proposes to B accepts. Gamma proposes to A after being ejected, they accept. Alpha proposes to C, they accept. And so finally, you end up with this case where there are no more lonely Greeks. And at the end of this, you can see the final pairing in this grid. So you end up with Gamma proposed to A, Delta proposed to B, Alpha proposed to C, and Beta proposed to D. And if you take a look at this grid, there's no case where any one of these people can go to another person in the other set and say, hey, would you like to be with me? Because all of these are stable. And so that's the property of stability. There's no case where one person can unilaterally renege profitably on their current partner, because if they did so, they would end up alone. And so that is, for every one of these stable matching problems, you'll find a stable configuration. So there are 3 proofs that we're going to go over today. They're pretty intuitive though, and they build on each one, or they build off of each other. So the first one we're going to go over is the proof of pair stability. So the fact that all of these pairs will be stable by the end. There's a proof of coverage that everyone will have a partner. And then finally, there's a proof of the existence of a stable configuration, saying that every single one of these stable marriage problems has a stable configuration in the end. So the first one, So the first one is pair stability. And so the intuition behind this is, let's say that there is some pair alpha and A that prefer each other to their current partner by the end of Gale Shapley. If that were the case, alpha would have proposed to A before their current partner, given the algorithmic process. And when A received this proposal, they would have reneged on their current partner, or they would have not accepted a proposal from anyone else if they preferred alpha over that other person. So in either case, alpha and A would not have been matched with any other person in Gale Shapley. And therefore, by the end of this, every single couple that is paired with Gale Shapley will be stable, because the algorithm would not allow it. And so it's going through that process. It's weird because it's not a math proof as much as it is like an algorithmic proof. And so this then builds to proof 2. So the proof of coverage, and this is basically just saying every single pair or every single couple in Gale Shapley will go through this process. And so if everyone is in a pairing by the end of Gale Shapley, and every single pairing is stable in Gale Shapley, then it leads it to believe that every single person will be in a stable pairing by the end. And then finally, so this is the proof of the existence of a stable configuration. So every single preference set that you can throw at Gale Shapley, no matter the size, will have a stable match. And it's kind of funny, the proof for this one. It's basically, because Gale Shapley will be able to find a stable match for any set of preference, or for any 2 sets of preferences, it means that one must exist for all of them. And so it guarantees that every single configuration will have a stable pairing. So those are the big takeaways from Gale Shapley. However, that's a very mathematical algorithmic look at it. What's important is, how do we apply this back to this original idea of going to a market where you can't use money and using it to create smarter design? So originally in this presentation, I wrote this a long time ago at the start of this class. And I used to work as a game developer, and we used it for server matchmaking. And then life happened to me, and I found an even better example. So if you guys remember, or if you look back in your email inboxes, I was supposed to give this presentation on September 15th originally. However, my life turned upside down. So the week before, I was diagnosed with a blister aneurysm in my left carotid artery. And I had brain surgery on the 14th. And thankfully, I did not have to give the presentation on the 15th, because it probably would not have been a very good one at that point, because I still was tentatively able to read. And so what happened there was, I did surgery, and then kind of had time to sit on this. In that surgery was a guy named Austin, who's a friend of mine and also a neurosurgery student at the University of Utah. So he is wrapping up medical school with the neurosurgery team at the University of Utah Hospital, and he's getting ready for his residency. And that is a place where this stable matching algorithm has been used. So residencies are instances where hospitals and doctors have to come up with a massive amount of pairs. So every single residency position at a hospital is filled with a resident. And this has been done since doctoring was a thing, but it wasn't until recently that we developed better systems of doing it. So how this used to work is this laissez-faire system of like, you just get an offer and you choose whether or not you accept it. And there was no structure, there was no timeline. It was just you get offers and you accept them. And the problem in these laissez-faire residency environments is that doctors would receive, because if you look at this from the point of view of the hospital wants good doctors to do residencies. And so if you want good doctors, what you can do is you can get to the good doctors first. And so you would go to top schools and you would send out these offers. And the issue is if you play this game, then every other hospital is incentivized to do it before you do. And so what was happening was hospitals were looking for residents earlier and earlier and earlier, to the point where they were going to medical students in their second year of medical school and giving what were called exploding offers, which are, you have to accept this offer now or it is going to explode in a week and you'll never get another one. And so these doctors were then put in this, sticky situation of, do I accept this exploding offer now, or do I wait for a while and hope that another one comes along and that it's better than the one that I currently have? And the issue with hiring residents out of their second year of medical school is that you can't see the rest of their medical school. As somebody that's done brain surgery, I would prefer if they got good grades throughout their entire medical school career versus just the first 2 years. And so hospitals were taking these big gambles, and ultimately the laissez-faire system wasn't good for hospitals and it wasn't good for doctors. And so eventually a clearinghouse was made. And so now what happens is all of these hospitals say, we need to fill X amount of roles. They go to the clearinghouse and they make that request. And then the doctors will go to that same clearinghouse and say, well, I prefer these hospitals, and hospitals will do the same. I prefer these doctors. And ultimately, they will use something very, very similar, something based on stable marriage, to come up with these pairings such that everyone can have faith that, their pairing, ultimately, they wouldn't have gotten a better one if they were able to unilaterally go and request positions from hospitals. And so this is one of those situations where stability is important, because imagine if you go to the clearinghouse and you cannot be confident that your pairing is stable. So going back to that proof, let's say that you get out on the other side of the clearinghouse and all of a sudden there is some hospital that you could go to as a resident that you prefer and they prefer you. All of a sudden that leaves some vacancies, and then the entire market unravels and you go back to this laissez-faire system. Market unraveling is a very, very important thing to avoid when you're designing markets. And so this is one of those cases now where it's very, very important to me, because someday I will need to have brain surgery again. And I would prefer that the resident or the doctor had a good system under which they chose their hospital, because I wouldn't want it to be like, they had to move away from their fiance and they're like, oh man, maybe if I was at, Mayo Clinic, my wife wouldn't have left me. And then that's like, as I'm on the operating table, he's talking about that. But anyway, so that's the importance of these market environments where you can go through and you can assign allocations of resources without having to use money. So that is the basics of it. If anyone has any questions, please speak up.